engagement. This is where change for the betterment of our society and our community truly begins. If we look back in history, no movement or revolution has been successful without the society rising up in action and demanding change and not stopping until success is achieved. The same applies now. Our community is facing a war against our children, our women, our men, and our marginalized. It takes a partnership between church, state, and citizens to make a lasting impact. What we hope you gain through this constructive conversation is that you, your neighbors, your colleagues, and your family are instrumental in creating a hostile environment for trafficking to occur in our community. For our sons and daughters to remain free, and for those that have been manipulated and coerced to be restored. We want you to understand that you don't need to possess a badge or a title to make a difference. That without you, human trafficking in our community ending human trafficking in our community won't be possible. It takes a community to heal the community. The brave people that sat before you heard the need and responded. I hope you can see what their passion has forged so that we must now follow behind to strengthen the fight. My name is Christi Bolz, and I'll be moderating this panel. My husband and I became involved when we started working in India. And through research, we were shocked to realize how it was happening here and how prevalent human trafficking was happening here, right here in our community. We knew that we couldn't look away, and through due diligence, we learned the largest gap in the continuum of care was long-term residential treatment, and it still is. And this is where Arcadia was born. My husband and I founded Arcadia, and we are on a path to build a facility that will serve female survivors ages 11 to 17 here in DFW through a holistic, trauma-informed care community in a secure location that will provide traditional therapies, non-traditional therapies, medical care, education. However, Arcadia or any nonprofit in this sector would not be possible without the community. It is truly going to take the community to wrap around this issue, these survivors, the demands, the men that are wrapped up in this, in order to actually end this problem. So I will take a minute to introduce our panelists. First, we have Glenna Pendleton. She's going to tell you a little bit more about herself. She is an amazing, brave woman that has some personal history with sex trafficking in her family. She's going to share a little bit more about that. And then we have Mark and Terry Demler. They have really started a grassroots movement within the church and have started a nonprofit at St. Michael's in Dallas. They're going to tell you a little bit more about that in a few minutes. And then we have Carolyn, who originally started in legislature, assisting down in Austin, found out about the issue there, and then came back and is now with the Chamber of Commerce with Colleyville. And she's going to tell us a little bit more from the business aspect. So I'm going to give you guys a few minutes to introduce yourself. Glenna, you want to go ahead and get started?
Sure. So the question that Christi sent me was, how did you get involved? I actually know the moment at which I got involved. I was working out of my house. It was lunchtime. I think I went to get a sandwich in the kitchen, right? And I was a little concerned because my daughter that weekend, I had an app on her phone where I could kind of track her occasionally. And I had found her at a hotel a couple times over the weekend. And when I questioned her about it, she gave me an excuse. And as a mother, I knew she was lying. I called and talked to a friend about it. She suggested I look at her phone log, so I did. And I found a number on there about 50 times. It looked unusual, obviously, over a few days, and I Googled that number, and in just a few short clicks, I was looking at a picture of my daughter in a nightie and a thong, laying on a hotel bed. That was the moment I got involved. That was the moment that really changed our lives forever. The journey with my daughter was not short, it was long. Working through the prosecution of her traffickers, her own healing, both physical and emotional, took months of time. And once she seemed to be getting her footing and we had put the last trafficker in jail, I broke down. And I took a few months to step back, take a big step back, and went through some therapy. Therapy primarily to deal with the guilt, the fear, and the shame that a parent has anytime their child suffers a significant trauma. Once I felt sturdy enough, I decided to put my voice out there. I attended a Five Stones Task Force meeting. That's a Fort Worth Police Department task force on child sex trafficking. At that meeting, I met a group of women who had started, not in my neighborhood, they have a table, by the way, out front. They provide community awareness meetings, and I started speaking as a survivor. After a few months of that, I felt I needed to know more about trafficking. So I reached out to Traffic 911, a wonderful organization here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that provides victim advocacy, rescue, and education. Was trained as a TRAPS presenter and started presenting to youth and community groups. I even speak at the Juvenile Detention Center in Tarrant County. Still didn't feel like it was quite enough. So I started an organization last year called STEAM, it's the Sex Trafficking Education and Awareness Movement. The mission of that organization is to unite communities around this issue. We push for better communication and collaboration and understanding between communities and agencies and organizations. We want to give families and survivors a voice and be able to identify and fill gaps in resources and services. And lastly, that momentum is really starting to speed up. I am working with Unbound here locally, and we plan to start a survivor group for families in just the next couple of months. And I met with Poetic over in Dallas, a wonderful organization that does daytime help for victims. And we are working on a family advocacy program that we hope to get started this year. That's good.
Thank you. Mark and Terry, do you want to share?
Excuse me. Good morning, everyone. Mark and I, at our church, St. Michael and All Angels in Dallas, in 2015 had a symposium on human trafficking. We, at the time, we were not involved with putting it together, but it was put on by the Episcopal Diocese, the Catholic Diocese, and the Anglican Center in Rome. And we had really good attendance, and we went just to see what everyone had to say about this issue. And afterwards, we were kind of stunned because we did not understand the issue and that it was so prevalent in our city, in our state, in the United States, and globally. But it was one of those things that if you read something about in the paper, it was always over there, always somewhere else in another country. So we started talking about it and talked to some clergy and some people around church and decided that we would start a ministry with the focus on trafficking. We named it Project Moses, and we spent, this was in the fall of 2016, and we spent some time the first year just having people come in and talk to us. We went to events to try to learn about this issue. It's so complex and so difficult when you first start really trying to learn about it. And so we did that, excuse me, and we started talking about it around church. People started, oh, I don't know about that either. You know, as we have a congregation of about 6,000 people. And so we saw that we had an opportunity there to just help everybody become aware, learn the signs, learn that it is on your street. It doesn't matter where you live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. It doesn't matter if it's anywhere, even in a gated community, does not matter. So we decided that Moses would have the pillars initially of education, advocacy, and partnerships with a lot of the wonderful groups that are around town that work with this every day in the trenches.
Well, I think, and maybe unlike Glenna, knowing the exact moment, for me, it was, and I think for Project Moses, it's been more of an evolution. It did start at the symposium that Terry talked about, and at least our exposure to the issue. However, at that point, I think we left there not knowing that we might want to do something, and but not knowing exactly what to do. Like the good husband that I try to be, I mainly followed Terry's lead, and she had the passion behind it, and I wasn't sure. I was very tentative and really wanted to take a look at things. So it took me a little while for it to catch me and understand that not only is this an issue in our community, but it is something that we as a church and as a new ministry could maybe impact. And so we began to develop the organization around a ministry, not knowing exactly where it was going to take us. But it's so it's been an interesting couple of years, but we've learned a lot and are beginning to get a little clearer focus of what Project Moses might be for us now and in the future.
Thank you. Carolyn, would you like to share how you became involved?
Yes. Boy, I'm amazed already just listening to who's on this panel with me. I became involved in this in 2003. I became aware of trafficking. And what is making my day right now is that the person that introduced this to me is in the room and he is speaking later on. And Gibbon will be speaking later this afternoon. And he and his adopted mom, Sandy Shepard, came to Austin when I was working for a state rep and came with their story. And I went, what are you talking about? That was so foreign to me. I went, well, he came from across the seas. You know, it's not happening here. And I thought, no, it is happening here, because he was here, and it was happening in Texas. And so they came to tell their story with the intention of trying to get some legislation passed. And as you probably are aware, back in that session, Texas was one of 2 states that finally recognized human trafficking as not the most popular thing to be doing, but they really haven't done that much with it to make it something that's a criminal basis. But because of Gibbon coming and telling his story over and over and over, because he came many times, that's what it takes, that they heard him and that a law was passed. Fast forward to my position now at the chamber. Last summer, we did an Empowering Women's event, and we took a totally different approach of not trying to do the inspiration, feel good, you're special type person. We took the issue of human trafficking, and with the intent of it being empowering women to make a difference. We had over 200 people at that luncheon. Vanessa came and spoke, and Rebecca with Valiant Hearts came and spoke, so we had someone that talked her story as to what she'd been through. And then, of course, Vanessa with more facts and knowledge about this issue, that I can tell you there were men and women sitting in that room that were mesmerized. They did not move. When it was over, I think they could have sat there another 2 hours just to listen to what was happening and what was she even talking about. The stories that she would tell along the line of going into a store and watching a man approach a young lady in a store, and then someone going in and saying, don't you dare listen, don't you lose that phone number instantly, his whole purpose. These are stories that many of you know, that many of you have lived or heard about or whatever. For our group, it was the first time for us to really start hearing it. What I see happening now is the constant conversation about it, which is the best thing that could be going on in the business community, in the church community, in the nonprofit world, in the schools, which I'm involved with all of those out in our area. So to me, it's an honor to be here today, to learn and listen with y'all, to share what we can come and help, what we can do as businesses to help and be involved. I will say the two groups probably that are a part of our chamber right now are Valiant Hearts and Unlikely Heroes, which Valiant Hearts is located in Colleyville, and Unlikely Heroes is in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Thank you so much. We are going to go through a series of questions that help to better explain how they've been able to impact this movement, what challenges they've faced, and then what else our community needs to do. And so each one of them is going to kind of give an answer specific to their area of expertise or how they've been able to impact the anti-trafficking movement. And so, Glenna, in what ways have you been able to impact this movement in your community? I know it was a difficult start, but what have you been able to do?
Yeah, so I'll just talk about a few things. When you talk about impact, for me, because I'm a mother of a survivor, it's about making the story real for someone. So often that happens better in a one-on-one discussion than in a large group discussion. I actually prefer smaller groups where we can talk back and forth versus talking at people, right? To answer those questions, because everybody has a different question. You know, the common one obviously is how could that happen, right? Case studies are really important. In 2015, our case was called the Polly Cripps case. And an example of how real life cases can make an example and make an impact is a great one. At that time, that case had multiple traffickers, multiple minor victims, and it had victims with families who wouldn't stop, right? Insisted that they make a change. There was one detective working in Fort Worth Police Department at that time. He's here, Detective Lavanas. And he was working alone. He had to borrow resources to be able to even work these cases. A Homeland Security agent, not security agent, but Homeland, John Cochin just came in right as our case occurred. And so he had a little help there, but newbie on the block, right? Today, the Fort Worth Police Department now has 5 individuals in the trafficking unit. Last year, they got 166 tips on their hotline. They worked, 60 plus cases, and rescued 22 victims last year. 14 of those were minors. So, telling our story, pushing for people to do something and to talk is really where I sit. I also, through the organizations that I work with, I just want to mention, Five Stones Task Force underneath the police department has been tremendous in the efforts of increasing awareness. 2 billboard campaigns over the last 2 years. Media is a great tool. I've actually shared our story on media outlets. I've done interviews with the Star Telegram, for example, and the Fort Worth Weekly. Those are also very good and helpful. That's what I would share.
Thank you. Mark and Terry?
I think for us, just making sure that our community, our church community, learned about the issue, hopefully came to understand the issue, and realized that this is something we need to focus on. It's not something elsewhere. It is something here. Because so many people were just like us, and absolutely it's not here. So I think working with a lot of them and helping that knowledge base to grow and the understanding to grow, and that it takes every one of us to do it was important. We held a symposium at our church last October. Would you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, I think from a broader community impact, that symposium might have really had the most recent impact. Prior to that, as Terry said, I think we had to redefine what community was to us, and it was our congregation. And so we did a number of things to really help educate ourselves as Project Moses, but then educate the broader congregation, which was our community. But that led us to this last October 20th, where we did put on what we called a community-wide symposium, and we had a lot of local agencies that are here today and that you'll hear throughout the day, had them involved. We had state, we had the Attorney General spoke, and then we had kind of our keynote speaker was Becca Stevens, who is the founder of Thistle Farms in Nashville. And if y'all are familiar with that, she has really done a great deal to empower both trafficking survivors and abused women, and has a great model that we're actually looking at to probably maybe lead us to something in the future. So that was really our effort, if you will, into the broader community and how we can follow through with the tenets of Project Moses, which is all around awareness, education, and advocacy.
Thank you. Carolyn, can you tell us a little bit about how you've been able to impact maybe the business sector through the chamber?
Yes, I will. I think our luncheon is what started it. And the great thing there is that we had our police chief that was brand new to the community come to that luncheon when Vanessa and Rebecca were talking. And afterwards he walked up to Vanessa and says, "Is it here?" And she said, "Yeah." And he said, "Where?" "Here, here, and here." And he went, "Really? Oh my goodness." He now has the police force in Colleyville involved in learning how to be looking for human trafficking. He calls Vanessa and asks direction, which you can imagine what's that like, just trying to get educated on that. So I think that's important. Our hospitals in our area that were there that day went back and went, we have to figure out how we are going to be looking for these victims when they come through. What do we need to be looking for? MHMR, which I serve on the board of, which works a lot with special needs and immigration and a lot of different things, one of the questions I asked them when they were talking about their new program with immigration is, how many of those are being trafficked into the country through immigration? And they went, what? I said, yeah, are you tracking these people that are coming in through immigration as ones that could be here because of human trafficking, somebody's bringing them in? Gosh, we never thought about that. So I can say it's conversations, that comes up, and we keep going forward in giving ideas.
Excellent, thank you. So with, unfortunately, human trafficking is not as well known as some of the other issues in our community. And with that comes many challenges and obstacles in being able to impact and have forward progress at all times. And so I'd love for you guys to share what some of the challenges or obstacles you faced, and then maybe how you've overcome some of those challenges, or tried to. We're still facing many challenges in this forward progress. Glenna, you want to start us off?
Sure. I think one of the biggest challenges is the perception, particularly around sex trafficking, that it looks like something from the movie Taken, right? The van pulls up, you grab the girl off the street. That's actually very few cases where that happens. And the discussion of sex, the discussion of really seeing women as something that you can use is really prominent in our culture today. It makes it difficult for people to understand how someone can actually become a victim. They just don't see how that works. In sex trafficking in particular, one of the primary targets of traffickers, for traffickers, are children, right? Are children. They want the young, the youth, the young adults. And I actually looked, Planned Parenthood basically reports that only 24 states, plus the District of Columbia, mandate sex education in public schools today. Yeah. In Texas, the state of Texas does not require any sex or HIV education to be taught in public schools, yet if the school chooses to teach these topics, it's required to emphasize abstinence until marriage. If that's how we're looking at it from a legal standpoint, you can see what's happening and how difficult it is to get a solid curriculum in our schools. The legislature passed, a law to have standardized curriculum available, so they did that, and it's actually very good. I've looked at it. And we're seeing increased interest by schools in having training, but it's more of a please invite us approach. The organizations contact them, we work through their counselors or their teachers and look for that invitation. We did we did a little research through the task force last year and found that less than 1/3 of the public school districts in Tarrant County mandate training in their curriculum. So it's an issue area that we need to continue to work on. And the last one that I wanted to say is from a legal standpoint, we seem to believe that suddenly when a teenager turns 18, that they're on their own, they're viewed as an adult and making fully empowered choices. Yeah, I see the smiles in the room, right? Particularly for trafficking victims who are often lured into this before they turn 18. Then they turn 18 and suddenly we have to prove the fraud, force, or coercion in the courts. It makes it very difficult for trafficking victims to be seen as victims and thereby rescued, identified and rescued. There we go.
I'd like to add, I think, on to perception as well, because particularly with so much talk today about immigration and people who come across legal or illegally from one country to another, it doesn't happen that much that people are brought illegally across the border, and we'll talk Mexico, Texas. I mean, a lot of that is smuggling, and they're being smuggled to come in terms of labor. Now, that's also trafficking at some point because of the way they're treated and not paid. And then, again, some of that can then morph into sex trafficking as well. But so many people, if they're brought into our state or even into the country, it's through legal ports of entry, just like drugs. So it's not something that is so prevalent coming over with illegal things. I mean, we're seeing families looking for asylum and trying to escape trafficking in other countries. And the other thing I'd kind of like to quickly touch on are resources. That's one of the things we badly need, both from a state standpoint and then just people helping things to grow and develop. Because in this state, we're a large state, and we don't have enough beds or safe places for once a victim is rescued and you want to help them become a survivor. There's not enough long-term beds, particularly. So I think, being an advocate for that with your representatives in Austin, I think is extremely important, that needs to be brought to the forefront and get everybody on board that we need to provide better resources and a safe place for these young women and young boys to stay.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that we've dealt with as a ministry is really the communication of how do we get people involved. And I mean, we're St. Michael and All Angels Episcopal Church that sits in the middle of the Park Cities. And people don't look at that environment as a haven for trafficking. And so it's somewhere else, as we've talked about. And I think part of our challenge was to really come with a set of facts, a set of documentaries, if you will, about things that are going on as close to our church as possible, so it would make an impact, so people would want to become engaged and then ultimately become involved. So it's that, taking the awareness part through engagement to involvement, and that we found that depending on the persons, is a very long process because people definitely would, they're appalled by what they hear, but trying to take that into spur some action is a difficult process. In the community at large, but certainly we found that in our ministry.
Thank you. Carolyn?
I think the biggest thing in the business community and the community in the city is just to talk about it, just to open your mouth. It was interesting when we first walked in and we were talking and the conversation was along the line that it's a dark subject. Oh, yeah, really? Yes, it's very dark, but we have to talk about it. And in our area, I was asked by one of our members, would you go and talk to some of these other chambers and ask them to have this as a topic to share with others? That this is something that is happening right here in our area, and all the time we're hearing more and more about it, and that's the good news, we're hearing about it. And I think that that will then get people talking more, but they still have to be willing to open their mouth and say something, and really want to know answers, and sometimes they don't even want to know it exists. And that's the business, that's businesses, that's communities, that's school, that's everybody, and y'all know that one. But I think that's the biggest thing I run into working with businesses, and right now, because they're not that much into it, but if they would just start asking questions, what does this look like? Let's talk about it. And I will say it is a topic that we will keep bringing up at our chamber. In fact, we'll be doing something else again this year. I'm not quite sure what it is yet, but we will not stop talking about it. It's there. I have a police chief that will not stop talking about it. So it's there and we're going to talk.
So good, so good. While there's been challenges in the progress, the forward progress, I would say over the last 2 years, we've seen some great forward progress. And there's still, those challenges still remain. So what success have you seen and progress have you seen secondary to civic engagement? You want to start?
Okay. So one that I've seen is a shift in law enforcement perception. I'm not saying it's across the board, every city and every police department, but huge shift in the perception of traffic victims as victims and not as, perpetrators. We have leaders in Texas that are now sponsoring laws to really go after this, and they're becoming more and more specific, which is great. I mean, early on it was, let's understand the issue. Okay, well, let's get after the issue, right? The governor's got the child sex trafficking team, it has a prevention education curriculum, identification tools that they're making available. They're doing public PSAs, training videos, either one. Care coordination teams are in place and working, at least in Dallas and Fort Worth. Increased community services. There's funding and grants out there. If you bring forward a solid approach to address the issue, there are some funds available. You can go after them. And criminal justice is really doing more training. Part of that's sponsored by the governor's program. And obviously we're seeing way more increased focus from organizations, agencies that want to take up the banner and help with this. And with those that I'm sitting with here today, the more community organizations that get involved, the stronger that conversation becomes. And I think that's where you make an impact.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Glenna. Mark and Terry?
One of the things I think I've seen in Dallas is the engagement of the Dallas Morning News and some other media outlets. We had one of our parishioners set up with the editorial board an interview prior to our symposium, and they were already looking at this issue because it was very important to them. And there was a lot of good back and forth about it, but they have taken this on. There's been some amazing articles in the paper, particularly the last 6 months, and a whole section one Sunday on different aspects of it and different ways that you can get involved. And I think that's a wonderful thing, because then more people will read about it and come to understand that, yeah, this is a problem here.
Yeah, I think that whole sense of community of people that are working on this issue has grown, and pretty astounding to me. We joined the North Texas Coalition Against Human Trafficking, pretty selfish reasons initially, to really learn for ourselves what are all of these agencies doing, what piece of this issue are they trying to address. And for us, it's been really heartwarming to see, because we see there's a lot of them here. We see them at various events. We were in Austin a couple of weeks ago for Advocacy Day and saw a lot of people that have really kind of become a family that's all like-minded people working against a common cause. And that, I think, is a success. And maybe it's just because the newness to us that makes it look like such a success. But I think, as everyone has said, it really does appear that there's a lot of momentum going, and people talking about ending trafficking and putting some dates on it and things like that. And I don't think we heard that a few years ago, that people are beginning to see there is an impact, and we can do it together. And as a group of agencies, if we work together, that there is probably an end in sight.
I would say that it comes to the fact of the publicity that's been out there lately. In the last year, there's been more stories, more articles, more TV, more news. There's movies out there now talking about this, that people can see it, touch it, feel it, understand it. It hits you more and more. That, to me, is helping to get through some of the challenges that we're dealing with, for it to be real. But also, I would say we have a lot of work to do in the business world as far as keeping it real for people to know that. But once it happens in their business, once it happens to one of their friends, once it happens to their daughter, granddaughter, whatever, it's amazing how the story changes. And I have seen that since we did our luncheon last summer. So they're getting it. It's a slow process, but they're getting it. Legislative-wise, I will tell you, having been down there and worked it, when Gibbon would come and see us, it's not just going down there and having a day for human trafficking. It is constant communication with your representatives and senators to let them know how important this is. Don't stop until the session ends in May. It doesn't just happen. So don't give up. Just keep doing it.
Next, I really want to talk about what areas are we lacking to address each focus area of human trafficking. When I say each focus area, Glenna mentioned the Five Stones Task Force, and they have 5 focus areas that they really resonate with, and that's demand, that's legislative or advocacy, that's restoration, and education awareness. Did I miss one? Intervention. Prevention. And so in each of these areas, what ways do you feel like we are lacking, or gaps in those coverages are we seeing, and how can the community get involved in order to address those areas of need?
How long do we have? And I say that, I laugh. I mean, I can tell you my own personal list, but I actually just started connecting with other families. I mentioned earlier 22 victims rescued. Okay, the majority of those have some type of family connected with them. And the understanding what happened before, during, and after that trafficking is crucial, right? So I've started meeting with mothers, and I have 8 now that I have connection with. It's hard to get connected. They don't want to talk. The guilt and shame with this, want to just bury it, put it under the carpet, bury it under the carpet. So I'm making those connections though. And I actually took this group of mothers, 5 of them together, and we went through an exercise and we talked about the different dimensions. For the prevention side, really the biggest beef was the demand side. The fact that we are not truly going after demand directly. We want to just bury it and not see it. The fact is that we have buyers out there that are buying pornography and they're buying our children, they're doing it without regard for the consequences for the victim and how that person actually came in to that business, right? You can talk about it from labor trafficking too. I know I talk about sex trafficking mostly, but in labor trafficking too, having a servant that does what you want them to do. Oh, see, I said time. She's giving me the, crap. Okay, sorry. Okay, so in demand, there's little consequence for buyers. We need to engage men and boys more directly as our biggest target group. They are the biggest group. More focused on diversion programs. Alternatives before trafficking occurs. There's not enough resources for families to deal with teenagers who are having problems. Children, it takes that, we don't know what age exactly a child develops the rational thinking and behavior to understand the consequences. And when crisis occurs, it is hard, believe me, to find help out there, to truly help. And of course, understanding the issue in this country and in this city. Recovery and restoration, I'm gonna go faster. Housing, immediate and long-term, we've talked about that already. Specialized counseling. You can find placement, but it's not always specialized. It's not always the right thing. Typical behavioral treatment facilities do not know how to deal with a trafficking victim. It is different for a trafficking victim. And reaching more families sooner in the process. Better access information and resources. Every mother I talk to talks about deer in the headlights. My daughter's missing. They tell me she may be trafficked. I get the call, I'm working with police, and then suddenly she's home. I am totally unprepared because I was totally focused on the rescue, getting her safe. And now she's home and I don't know what to do with her. I don't know how to talk to her. I could go on and on. And in reparation, obviously penalties, conviction, sentencing has to be stronger and it has to be more consistent. We need legal dysfunction support for our victims. I have mothers who are working desperately to get their children's records clear so they can get a job and move on with their life. Educational scholarships, many of these children, particularly even adults, don't have an education. If we want them to live a normal life, they need to be able to have the education to get those good jobs and do better. And victim notification is a problem too. Better at the federal level, but at the state level, it sucks.
There you go. Thank you. Margaret Terry?
I am encouraged by looking out at all of you and seeing men. Men need to get involved with this issue. It's very important, not only for men to be good role models, to talk to other younger men, teens, about respect for another human, much less just a female, but another human being, that you don't treat them this way. You don't do this to another person. I think that's really, really important. I agree. I think the penalties for people who buy need to be much stronger, and they need to be followed through with. Once you hear a recording between an undercover cop and a buyer who says they really want to buy an 8-year-old, but buy to keep, but they want 8-year-old, and then when they start talking money, well, I don't really have the money, can I just rent them? That has to stop, and we have to stop it by educating and men talking to men. Men talking to men. You probably don't have any idea of another male friend that you might have who buys. Because it covers the gamut. It's not just one group of people. So I will let you go for the time we have left. Sorry.
Thank you. No, I think as we talked earlier about the progress that we've made, And I think that is very encouraging, but there is so much more to do. And I think there's a lot that is lacking in that regard. When we talk about advocacy, we are struggling taking people that say they have an interest and being able to translate that into how do we, I mean, we've got a lot of people that we work with that don't even know who their representatives are or their senators that we, and trying to understand who are they involved in the issue, and how do we communicate with them. It was eye-opening for us. This was our first visit down to Austin for Advocacy Day. But you learn a little bit about the process and how anybody can get involved, and you don't have to have any special expertise. Just need to be passionate about an issue and know who to talk to, because they will listen, and there are a lot of things that that individuals can do. On the demand side, you know, have to look in the mirror. I also am glad to see a lot of men here, but there's an organization called New Friends, New Life that has a men's advocacy group, which I have recently joined, and it's great to see organizations like that we can go out, and one of the missions is really to talk to young men and teach them how to respect women. Basically, that is the mission, but there are a lot of things to get into schools, talk to educators, to allow us into schools to have that message be told, because there is a lot of denial out there. And so I think that's a part that as men, to the business community and to young men, and especially sports programs, things like that, that I think we can do as men to get involved. And that every school, every church has a group that you can talk to talk about those issues.
Thank you.
I'm good.
You're
I
good.
think they just said it all. I'm writing notes is what they're talking, so I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. So next we're just going to talk about a little some action items that you can take or you can take into your communities to make sure that the movement is all encompassing. And so action items, how can members of our community become more involved? I think we've talked about this just a little bit through our discussion today, but maybe some more clear, I love best next action items. I'm a huge advocate of that. I need them in my life, but how can people really truly get involved? How can, you know, what conversations can we be having in, you know, the business community, the church community, education, and healthcare?
Yeah, I'm glad you said healthcare. She asked me specifically, and I just need to do this. I did not speak about the medical field. I worked in the medical field for years. We have hundreds and hundreds, thousands of professionals in the medical field that are touching these potential victims, at-risk youth, the victims during the trafficking. That's an area where we really need to step up the game and make sure that our healthcare professionals understand this issue and can help us in identifying, rescuing, and helping on that side. So I want to say that.
Thank you.
To your specific question, I'm going to make it short and sweet. Learn. Make sure you understand it, whatever way you can. There's meetings and stuff everywhere all the time. All you got to do is Google trafficking in Fort Worth and you'll see something popping up. 2, speak up. We tell everybody when we talk about the trafficking hotlines. The Fort Worth Police Department has a tip line. Do not hesitate. If you see something and it looks suspicious, don't be afraid. They're not going to like make fun of you or you know.
You don't have to have
You won't get the conversation I did when I said my daughter's being trafficked and they put me over to pay a traffic ticket. That doesn't happen.
Oh,
Yeah. But don't be afraid. Ask, you know, say something. If enough people say something about something that looks a little wonky, then there's probably something wonky going on. And then lastly, get involved. And I could go on forever. I probably know 100 different organizations and agencies that you could volunteer and work with, get involved in legislative campaigns. I put my cards over there. If you want help figuring out where you fit in this, if you email me, it'll say Gigi, not Glenna, because that's my face, public face, gigi@thesteamgroup.org. I am happy to engage with you to help you figure out what fits for you.
thank you, Glenna. You're awesome. Thank you. Mark and Terry.
Well, I would say, I mean, go to your church and start something. Talk to your clergy, get them involved. If you're just involved in any sort of group, a book study that's separate from church, but something in your community, start the conversation and help them learn and understand. One of the things I always have with me, and this is from our Homeland Security, and the woman who is here in the Dallas area is awesome. But it's got what to look for and if you think someone's being trafficked, what to ask them maybe. But you also want to be very careful because if they're working, their pimp is not far. So you don't want to endanger them, you don't want to endanger yourself. There's also the national hotline you can call and say, this is what I saw, this is where it was, and they will then contact authorities in your city. Also have this, that it breaks apart and put it on your keychain. It's got the 800 number on it for the national 800 number and a way they can text. If you saw someone and you slip something to them, drop it by their feet. I mean, there are ways to do this, or make sure all your friends have all of these things to do that. But for me, the most important thing is just don't sit and not do anything. Get involved.
One thing I'd say about our ministry, Project Moses, I mean, there's nothing proprietary about it. We liked the name, we thought it communicated what we wanted to do, but we would be happy for any of your churches to kind of take you through the process that we went through to build an organization that seems to be passionate and growing about this issue. And the other thing is, I mean, we all, in our churches, we all are in some sort of a business environment. There is so much going on this issue. If you look at the airline industry or the hotel industry, they're all doing great things to help communicate and prevent these things, because those are two industries that both in transportation and housing obviously tend to be very much involved in visually seeing trafficking. So they're doing a lot of things, but any other businesses, as part of the men's advocacy group, part of what we do is try to talk to different businesses about just their expense policies and making sure that it's not okay to go out and entertain clients at strip clubs and things like that, which used to be the norm, and now that is not happening. But there are still people that need to understand that they can make an effort internally in their own businesses to communicate this issue. So those are things that I think any of us can do.
Thank you. Carolyn?
I would say to you, as organizations and people that are involved, don't wait for someone to call you. Identify 2 or 3 groups in your area that you would like to speak to and share with them the story, whatever that is. Pick up the phone and call them. Send them information about yourself, saying, you know, we'd love to come and do a presentation for you and your group. It might be a women's club, a Lions club, a Rotary club. It might be the hospital. It might be the hotel in town. And just let them know you'd love to come and do that. And tell them the story. You'll be turned down. It'll happen. Because they'll go, no, we don't want to talk about that. Fine, then go to your next one. Keep doing it until you at least make a presentation to one group this year. And once you do that, you'll be hooked. And they'll be sorry, because you'll be calling everybody and saying, hey, we got a story to tell. We want you to hear our story because this is what's happening in your area. That's the way you need to do it. Don't wait for anyone to call you, because they're not. You've got to get yourselves out there, get yourselves known for them to want to know more. And that's going to be hard, because when you're a nonprofit or you've been through something like this, you're protective and you're cautious. But you have a story to tell to save others. And that's your whole story. We want to help you as a business save others. That would be my takeaway on that, because it's something that I get calls all the time in the chamber of people that want to come and speak. Turn down many, but when I find one that I think our group would be interested in, I do it. But when we're talking hotels, we're talking airlines, we're talking department stores, hospitals, they need to learn. And I was talking with one yesterday that was looking for a group to come and talk to their physicians. So you do it. You get out there, sell yourselves, and let them know this is a problem. So y'all are important.
Yes, very much so. If y'all have any questions on your note cards, Deborah's going to take those up. Just raise your hand if you have any questions. And while she does that, I just want to highlight some different areas as well, just to kind of dig in. In the church, if you're involved in your churches or any social groups, make sure that they're having these difficult conversations. They've highlighted this, but it's difficult to talk about men and porn. It is a part of our culture, and it's something that is so taboo in the churches that we're not having that conversation. And that's where the conversation needs to be had. That is where transparency needs to be. Having the conversation in the businesses. One, hiring. These girls and men have such a difficult time getting a job. And then even understanding the things that they're going through and making sure that there is sensitivity to the process that they're going through. But in order for them to feel like they're worthy more than what their trafficker made them feel, they have to have a place in our community. And the only way that place is going to be provided is if businesses and churches and social groups and schools wrap around these girls truly and get to understand what the trauma brain, girls and men and women, what the trauma brain is actually doing. So if you are hiring, if you are working in any type of field, whether it be healthcare or education, it's really important to understand what the brain has done with trauma and what that healing process looks like, to really truly understand what they're going through, well, from your point. And I think legislative, she briefly touched on it. It's important that you are sending a letter every week. If you don't have time to get out there and get involved, then be sending a letter, send an email, give a call to your legislature. This session, bills may come out of committee, but they may never get passed. They may die. And that's because it's the community that says, we want you to address this issue. It's you guys, but it's not just at the state level. It's at our municipal level as well. Our mayor needs to hear that our community is done. Our children are more important, and the health of this community depends on us taking care of this issue and hitting this issue head on. And that's at the municipal level and the county level as well. How are we doing this? Where are we appropriating funds at the municipal level, at the state level? I'll tell you from a residential treatment facility aspect, there's a lot of money that's been set aside for these programs, but there's no buildings to make these programs, and they have not set aside appropriated funds in order to build. So we need to talk to them about reappropriating funds for infrastructure. In healthcare, quickly, I just want to touch on, you might hear my voice is a little off. I was in the ER, urgent care is like a standalone, because I had no voice 2 days ago, and I was like, this is not good. Like, I sounded like Mickey Mouse or Minnie Mouse. And I told them I have to get this taken care of. And the ER nurse was like, or urgent care / ER nurse was like, what are you doing the symposium on? I told him, he's like, that's happening here. I'm like, whoa, you need to know about this. You are seeing these girls and these boys and these women and these men. They are coming in here, especially these standalone, because they don't think that they're as educated about the issue, and they can get in and out pretty quickly. And then in education, a lot of our schools still want to deny the fact that it could be happening in their schools. And it is happening in their schools. There are recruiters that are inserting themselves in the landscape of these schools. And they need to be having these tough conversations. They need to be educating their teachers and their counselors on what to look for. They need to be educating their parents. And these parents need to be having these tough conversations. And then just socially, if you're a part of a group, a small group, a group in your business, adopt a survivor. Put together care bags. Do things like that. I mean, there are so many inventive and innovative ways that people can make an impact in this. Chapsticks, I've seen chapsticks with the human trafficking hotline number that you don't know it's there until you peel back. And so, I mean, there's just so many different ways that you can touch the lives that are wrapped up in this. Men, demand is huge. It's something that we don't, like they've said, we don't talk about often enough. These are hearts of men, and I feel like, and honestly, when I first got involved, I couldn't stand the men that bought, I couldn't stand the traffickers. The more I've come to learn and realize, our men are at war. I mean, there is a war waged against them. You can't go into Target without seeing a woman in a bra and panties. It is in front of them from the age, I have a 4-year-old son. It's in front of them from the age of 4. We have desensitized it. We have made it to be a part of our culture. And porn rewires the brain. And therefore, they continue to need more and more. It's an addiction, like cocaine, like Dr. Pepper. They need more and more, and so it's this tangible need. And so that's, it's been here, it's been happening. But social media, the availability of porn, so those conversations need to be happening. And it all starts with a conversation. It starts with getting involved. It starts with donating resources to those that have forged this path. So we're going to move on to some questions real quick. Project Moses, this is for you guys. What engagement do you have with other faith-based communities or other denominations?
Well, in terms of our diocese, which is, our diocese is made up of many Episcopal churches. I mean, we have shared with them what we're doing and encouraged them to do it. Again, we still run into the same problem, particularly with the smaller churches, I find, that maybe are on the outskirts of the area. They don't want to talk about it because of what it is, and they don't believe it is where they are. Oh, well, in the big city, sure, but not out here in a more rural community, and it is. So we have talked with them in terms of other faiths. Like I said, we had a relationship with the Catholic Charities, because they do some amazing work, and they do a lot of work on this issue as well. And the Methodists are really heavily involved in this issue as well. So, and some of the other faiths, I just have not gotten to yet. So, I can't speak for all of them at this point, but.
Thank you. Mark, do you have anything to add?
Well, and again, primarily in the Episcopal community, but I'm a member of an organization called the Brotherhood of St. Andrews, and it's a men's organization. It's actually the oldest ministry in the Episcopal Church. And this summer, I'm going to do kind of a pilot session of a workshop that we can hopefully use that to spread throughout the country. There's about 500 chapters in the country of Brotherhood of St. Andrews. And that is, again, what we're talking about, how as Christian men we can go out and understand what our part is in the community. Because, and I think it's important because there's a huge educational and awareness process that's going to have to take place first. But that's part of this workshop that they're going to put together and hopefully be able to spread that fairly quickly throughout the organization. So that's something that we're trying to do as Project Moses, to use that as our platform to talk to primarily the Episcopal Church, but we're certainly not limited to that. That's just, we've got to walk before we can run, I guess.
Yes. Glenna? are you comfortable, if you're not comfortable answering this question,
I told you, bring it on.
okay. Where is your daughter today?
Oh,
I mean,
my daughter's now 20. She finished her high school education through an online program, got a diploma, not just a GED. She got a phlebotomy certificate last year. She just got a scholarship. And by the way, I found the scholarship through another mother who worked in healthcare, not through some agency. But she is working to become a community health worker certification. So hopefully that will help her make a little more money and be able to pay her bills and mom quit having to help her pay.
and also have a great impact.
Yes, and have a great impact. And by the way, I gotta tell you, these victims, if they make it through, the survivors, they are strong. I mean, they have faced extreme adversity. They're fearless. If they can get over their fear, they're fearless. They do have insecurity. You know, her relationships are complicated. Her first few after she came home were awful because they don't know what a good relationship looks like, right? Many times when they're teenagers, if they get pulled into this early, they don't even have a healthy relationship before they're in a bad one. And now they're an adult, and we expect them to know better. You know, it's complicated, but I will tell you that if anything, I would tell you the best thing that came out of this. Before my daughter was trafficked, she hated me as her mother. We were at odds with each other. We were in that teenage craziness, right? And I tell you today, I talk to my daughter once or twice a day. She calls me with everything. I mean, we are like this. So that's the good news.
That is great.
She's doing good.
Yeah, it's been a long process.
You gotta stick with them.
Yes, you do. And so up here we have just some of the organizations that are represented here today. There are so many more that are represented. You'll see their tables out front. And just like Glenna said, any of us can get you engaged. If there is a particular focus area that you are drawn to or passionate about, let us know so that we can help you get plugged in and get engaged. Those conversations, I mean, and I trust that you all are already having those conversations. So empowering others within your community to have those conversations is so important and so vital. Just like I said before, you know, no revolution or movement or anything we've done that has been positive for our country has ever been successful without groups within the community. It doesn't just take the police officers, it doesn't just take the legislators, it takes the community. And they have to hear our voice. And so I think that's the most important thing to make sure that we're getting out into the community is that we are louder on this topic because we want to take care of it. And we want it out of our community. We want to make it our community, a hostile environment for this to even be able to occur in our community. And we want to make sure that we're, you know, taking care of those at-risk youth. I think that's something we've touched on a little bit today, but it's a big piece of it, prevention. How are we making sure that we are mentoring those at-risk youth, that we're providing services so that they don't get to the point where they fall into these traps of manipulation. And so thank you guys so much for sharing y'all's stories and y'all's obstacles and your progress. These are brave people. You don't have to go start an organization to make a difference. There are people that have forged that path, have been pioneers in this movement. And just getting your community involved, getting your circles of influence involved by having those difficult conversations is, you know, where a lot of this begins. It shouldn't be just a conversation within the police department or these organizations and agencies. It's a conversation that needs to be had everywhere. Yes?
If somebody gets rescued and they're of a foreign origin, let's say they don't have the right to vote, what do you do in that?
I will say that's a big, you know, another gap in coverage, period. There's a lot of focus right now on that, I call it the recovery piece here in America, because a lot of times the girls that are, and boys that are involved don't necessarily see it as a rescue. So that's a big gap in coverage as well. And it's something that I know that different organizations are trying to shine a light on. I know Catholic Charities is they focus on those that are coming across that are undocumented, the children that have been wrapped up in this. That's their focus for any type of long-term care. Also, I believe Mosaic in Dallas, that is something that they focus on. But again, it's not something that is readily available. I do know that the refugee group here in Texas is very highly involved in, I know the Five Stones Task Force and different task force that are going on in the state. And they're also sitting at the table of those MDT meetings with the governor's team. And so while there are many gaps in coverage, we are trying, and those that are involved are really trying to address each issue.
I mean, is there like housing for them or how?
Mosaic does have housing for those that are undocumented or have come over as an immigrant. And then also Catholic Charities does for children. I know those two specifically have housing.
Housing's a problem across the board.
Yes, it's a problem across the board. So.
What about education? I mean, if it's somebody younger, then are you gonna put them in school? Are you gonna?
That's the ideal. I know, with us at Arcadia, that we will have education on site. Because the problem is these children that are getting back into society, immediately after they're recovered, they're put in with a foster family and they're expected to go to school essentially that next Monday. And they're gone by lunch, unfortunately, because they are not ready to be back in that education setting and to have the same expectations on them as these other children that they're sitting alongside. And so those education services do have to be offered in an alternative setting for survivors, because otherwise it's not going to be beneficial, and it has to be in a different timeline.
Well, I think too, for minors, at least in Dallas County, DFPS has changed their protocols, so they're working to address those.
Yes, and see, those are the conversations that are being had at these MDT meetings, and as collaboratives come together, those are the important things that are being addressed.
Also to follow up to that question about immigration relief for trafficking survivors, there is something called a T visa for trafficking survivors. There's a cap, and I can't remember what it is, but it's never met every year. So it's an extremely underutilized, I think, form of relief that is available to trafficking survivors who, because of their immigration status or lack thereof, were taken advantage of, because that's highly prevalent and a tool that is very much used in labor trafficking and in sex trafficking. So I work at Mosaic, so.
Yes, thank you.
And you can come to me because I'm the executive director of Opening Doors International Services. It's in Denton, and we are a nonprofit that came out of the Presbyterian Church. Now we're independent, and one of the things we focus on are the T visas. We provide permanent residence to these survivors, but we have to establish the channels. The people that are identifying the victims, and they identify this person is undocumented, then they can refer to us, and then we take care of that particular piece. We're not like Mosaic that has all these other things. We're just much smaller. So we only take care of the visa.
That's
But the
awesome.
visa is
Things
huge.
are happening.
Huh?
Things are happening.
Okay, good, yeah. I have one more question.
Yeah.
No, shut up.
No, you're great.
What about funding? I mean, who's providing funding?
Specific
That's the
to,
governor, no? It is.
specific to all areas.
You name it.
The governor has set aside a pretty large amount of money. I will tell you that it's not actually used that much. There is a lot of money available. However, some of the eligibility requirements are pretty stringent, such as, in residential treatment, they won't help with the infrastructure, but that infrastructure has to be there in order for the program to be operational. And so, we, like us in Arcadia,